Hello, I'm ASPPPO board member Richard Matthews. No one was more surprised than me at the reaction to my February 25th letter to CSA Chairman Mark Griffith asking a number of questions about the purchase of the Gallery of Shops. CSA's reaction begs the question as to the competence of this group of volunteers to govern Sea Pines and whether they can be entrusted with an additional $18 million of our dollars to be raised through an upcoming referendum. For those of you that may be unfamiliar with the issue, I'll back up a little. I know many of you do not live here. For some of you, the only inkling something is awry in paradise is the long, confusing emails you receive from CSA, written in a strangely defensive and justifying tone, invalidating a few people. Well, I represent some of those few people, and I can tell you it's no small number. If so, why would Griffith email 6,000 people in response to questions from just a few? A little history is insightful to where we are today and why it's important for you to pay attention and stay engaged. This will take a couple of minutes, but worth it for an understanding of what is going on here. CSA adopted a conflict of interest policy in 2014. The question is whether this policy was put into actual practice. There is a sloppy history of events and discoveries that point to the conclusion that no, it was not put into practice. And there is some question as to whether all three boards really knew how to put it into practice. I know that seems like a bizarre statement, given the makeup of CSA. Certified public accountants, former state insurance commissioner, former school board members, high-level business executives, bankers, real estate professionals, and small business owners. But as a plantation, we have evidence there are gaps in all organizations, CSA, ARB, and ASPPPO. Until a couple of weeks ago, ASPPPO did not have the customary conflict of interest policy in place. We have multiple instances of architects approving their own designs on the ARB. Just recently, the tax returns for both CSA and ASPPPO claimed compliance with a specific policy that requires all board members to complete a detailed questionnaire annually regarding any possible conflicts. When presented with a breach, it was greeted by derision by ASPPPO President Charlie Miner, who dismissively asked each board member to simply state out loud whether or not he or she had any conflicts, as if this was sufficient to squelch the concern or erase the IRS claim for compliance. As an ASPPPO board member, I have been championing the implementation of a conflict policy for ASPPPO for over 6 months. My fellow board members fail to grasp its importance. It has taken 6 months to accomplish what should have been done years ago and championed by the president, not me. In January, with high hopes of putting this behind us, ASPPPO approved a conflict policy which required each member to complete a questionnaire annually. When pressed, I pointed out the questionnaire that was to be used to identify potential conflicts did not exist. I was asked to draft one, which I emailed to all members on February 1st. It was ignored until adopted at the same recent meeting in which I was censured and threatened with a defamation lawsuit. The irony is astounding, but more about that in a moment. Over my term, I have heard concerns from constituents about potential conflicts. When raised by myself and others, they are summarily dismissed. Well, the occasional murmurs regarding potential conflicts grew to a roar with both the CSA's secret gate agreement and the purchase of the Gallery of Shops. These concerns are likely exacerbated by the fact that all of the documents supporting these transactions are being deliberately withheld from us. I felt compelled to act to get answers to reasonable questions that needed answers. So in late February, I both mailed and hand-delivered a letter to the attention of CSA Board Chair Mark Griffith. In that letter, I outlined 7 questions. I also produced a corresponding video. Public records reveal that CSA residential property representatives Mark Griffith and J.R. Richardson and resort representative Scott Richardson also sat on the Coastal States Bank Board, and resort board member Steve Birdwell's wife is an officer at Coastal States Bank. Given that the $900,000 plus mortgage on the Gallery of Shops was funded by Coastal States Bank, did any of these four individuals identify their potential conflict and or recuse themselves? A reasonable question, right? Especially given that both Griffith and Richardson have financial interest in Coastal States Bank. They are both shareholders. Recognizing the sensitivity of the question and not wanting to offend, I pointed out that in a small town such as ours, conflicts of interest are bound to happen. I did this multiple times. That's the very reason why we have policies that allow for disclosure and recusal as necessary. I also pointed out that the presence of a conflict is independent of the occurrence of impropriety. But for the sake of transparency, clarification is needed. Typically in situations such as these, leaders get out in front. They quickly address the issue. They admit and take responsibility for any errors or fault. They promise to get all questions answered and commit to a plan of action to ensure the error is never repeated. Well, not so with our leaders. Their strategy is to hide the facts, deny and delay, and attack those who dare question them. What I disclose next may shock you. For most of you, all you may have seen was Mark Griffith's written response to my letter on March the 16th, where he portrays himself as the victim of false accusations. You may have missed the outrage expressed in the March 6th community coffee, where Griffith confirmed that he, J.R. Richardson, and Scott Richardson, all CSA board members at the time, were also on the board of the bank that held the mortgage for Gallery of Shops. Griffith was adamant that he had no knowledge of a loan to the gallery owner at the time. He said he believed that the other CSA board members likewise did not know about the $907,000 mortgage. Griffith pronounced that there was no conflict of interest. Well, pardon me. Regardless of whether the mortgage was only $2, 3 CSA directors sat on both sides of the transaction. As you would guess, pleading ignorance was a most unsatisfying response to most of the 100 or so folks in attendance at that community coffee. You may also have missed Griffith's incomplete attempt to reply to my letter on social media. And almost everyone missed the real theatrics. Why? Because the next 2 board meetings were not videotaped, nor were they made available by webinar. On March 21st, the ASPPPO board meeting, CSA President Brett Martin notified the ASPPPO board that they, CSA, were considering legal action against me for defamation, which in turn led my fellow ASPPPO board members to censure me in an effort to make sure I was not covered by our D&O policy, but they would be in the event of such legal action. Of course, 6 of the board members serve on both boards. And 2 of those 6, Mark Griffith and J.R. Richardson, sat on both sides of the gallery transaction. Ironically, minutes after my censure, the ASPPPO board members adopted the conflict of interest policy and member annual questionnaire I submitted February 1st. I had been pushing for over 6 months. You cannot make this stuff up. 5 days later at the CSA board meeting, the CSA board of directors went into executive session, returned, said nothing, and then continued covering only routine matters. There was no announcement of what the private session covered. When asked if CSA had taken any action against me, CSA Chairman Griffith said no. Griffith would not comment if further action is contemplated. Someone must have reminded the CSA board that truth is not grounds for a defamation lawsuit. This was a clear attempt to silence me, in hopes of keeping you from knowing what is really happening. Look, I cannot be more plain. I do not have knowledge of any financial misdeeds or shenanigans, nor do I think ill of any of the board members as individuals. And these people are not idiots. However, I question their maturity and competence and insistence on secrecy, and so should you. How is it possible that not one of these high-level experienced professionals thought to do their due diligence and fiduciary duty when it came to the purchase of the Gallery of Shops? All they had to do was make certain that before they spent over $1.4 million of our money, that they asked the appropriate questions of each other to make sure that any possible conflicts would be exposed, and then proceed through their own conflict of interest policy procedures. How hard could that be? All they had to do was follow their own rules. Rules, by the way, they detail in their annual IRS tax return. Now, let's get to the heart of the matter, the most important issue that involves you as a property owner, your property value, and what you will pay in the future for assessments. The CSA wants $18 million. CSA wants you to believe that Sea Pines is in near financial ruin right now. It's a false crisis of their own making, fear-mongering to raise money. Look at their behavior. We know from the purchase of the Gallery of Shops, $1.4 million cash, the continued hiring of employees, the purchase of 3 new trolleys, and other expensive projects totaling millions of dollars, that CSA is not currently operating as if it were in dire straits. We still have $1 million left over from the hurricane assessment. Admittedly, with the long-term neglect of our infrastructure, we have financial challenges ahead, which all of us are willing to chip in and resolve. But first, we have an even bigger governance problem. We cannot solve one without the other. We must have confidence in our board prior to handing over millions of dollars. I believe the most effective way ahead is to stop the referendum. That should force these folks to step back and start to do things the right way with complete disclosure and transparency and excruciating detail in everything that they do. It is clear that whatever they were taught and practiced as paid professionals regarding due diligence, fiduciary duty, conflict of interest, disclosure, and recusal has been ignored when they act as volunteers. It is as if they think a pure heart becomes a reason to be incompetent. If this means we need a citizens committee made up of folks that questions and reviews their every financial decision, so be it. The best way to get the attention of the existing CSA board is to stop the referendum, not discuss it again until and or if these folks can prove their competence to the community. Thank you very much for your attention and interest.